Good morning, I'm Adam Sexton. We've not seen our U.S. senators as frequently on this program as we like due to the new work schedule adopted this Congress that keeps them in Washington on most Fridays. So we're very glad to see one of the 101 of New Hampshire's 2 here this morning. Senator Maggie Hassan, thanks for joining us in studio.
Good morning. It's great to be here.
So let's jump right into a serious topic involving a fellow Granite Stater. You're one of the top Democrats on the Homeland Security Committee now, and you have questions about how Corey Lewandowski operated in his sort of lieutenant role to Kristi Noem when they were in charge there for a year. So explain what has drawn your attention.
So first of all, it's great to be with you this morning. Look, we are at a time when families are struggling all over New Hampshire, all over the country, and we have a president who says he loves inflation and he doesn't think about people's finances, and also is demonstrating a level of corruption that's unprecedented in American history. Even with that said, the most corrupt administration in American history, the allegations against Corey Lewandowski make him stand out. As I think folks know, Secretary Kristi Noem put Lewandowski in charge pretty much of day-to-day operations at the Department of Homeland Security. And one of the first things he did was say that essentially all contracts that the department would enter into had to come through him personally, which meant, of course, that he could demand bribes or kickbacks from anybody who wanted the department's business. So that's one of the allegations against him, along with allegations that he provided sole source, no-bid contracts to his cronies. He also demanded a badge and a gun, even though he had a desk job. He toyed with or fired federal employees for very trivial reasons. And not only does this reflect corruption and abuse of power, but look, especially around the issue of contracts, these are contracts essential to our national security and the safety of our citizens. And so he slowed the process down, again, by creating this funnel up to the top that he had control over. So, look, he's a Granite Stater. This doesn't reflect Granite State values. This is, if these allegations are true, they are really serious and, again, show a level of corruption and disregard for security and safety that should trouble all Americans. But it also just really doesn't represent New Hampshire values, and I think it's critically important that we get to the bottom of what happened.
So what are you doing from the committee perspective?
So from the committee perspective, I have sent Mr. Lewandowski a letter saying, please preserve all your personal and official records. It's also become more and more clear that members of the administration don't always follow the rules and law about preserving records. So I wanted to put Mr. Lewandowski on notice that he has a legal obligation to preserve documents, preserve records, so that as we begin to investigate what the situation was and if these allegations against him are true, we will have the documentation that can help us with that investigation.
Are there any of these allegations that merit the attention of federal law enforcement, in your opinion?
Well, we will find out. Certainly, if the allegations about bribery and kickbacks are true, that would certainly seem to me to be an appropriate referral. But first of all, we just have to find out what happened.
While we're on the subject of Homeland Security, the conflict in Iran is not kinetic at the moment. We see airstrikes back and forth and a lot of negotiation. But what can you tell us from your briefings about Iran's capability or willingness to potentially strike the U.S. homeland with a terror cell or potentially a covert military operation?
Look, this is a really, really serious time. Obviously, the president went to war in Iran without coming to Congress, which means he didn't consult the American people about whether we should go to war. The war has cost American lives. It has cost our country its credibility around the world. And it's obviously had an enormous economic impact here at home when families were already struggling to begin with. The president needs to end this war and then needs to engage in the kind of diplomacy that can prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But at the end of the day, we are in this tenuous time. We have attacked Iran. They are weaker militarily, weaker economically, but strategically, their position has been strengthened by this administration. And what we're going to need is smart, competent people negotiating to make sure that Iran can never get a nuclear weapon. The president's actions have made made that harder.
Do they have the ability, though, to make some sort of surprise attack on U.S. soil?
I'm not going to discuss security issues right now, other than to say this is one of the reasons that many of us were so dismayed that the president said he was going to appoint Bill Pulte to be the interim director of national intelligence. Mr. Pulte is completely unqualified. The law actually says whoever has that position has to have background and experience in intelligence. Late breaking at the end of the week, we saw the president put up a serious person to take that job, but we are now in an interim period where we have a lot of concerns about the quality and competence of people on top of our intelligence community, and that should concern every American.
Staying in the region there, this isn't a recent headline, but in April, you and Senator Shaheen both voted in favor of a resolution to block the sale of armored bulldozers to Israel. What changed your mind on this issue, and what's going on right now in terms of support for Israel, which used to be so monolithic? We see it ebbing a little bit.
So first of all, I make decisions about arms sales on a case-by-case basis. In this case, I obviously have real concerns about the way the war against Iran has been started and is being operated, and so I thought it was really important to assess the sale of arms to Israel with the understanding that given the illegality of this war and the foolhardy nature of this war, I would have a hard time voting for a supplemental budget to fund the war for America. I'm certainly not going to then fund weapons for Israel. But I continue to believe Israel has a right to defend itself. It also needs to stop outrageous actions in the West Bank, and it needs to get much more humanitarian aid into Gaza.
The war always goes hand in glove with the affordability issue. Are there any policy ideas that can make this situation better for everyday Americans? Because we know once price inflation goes up, it's very rare to get it back down again. And the idea of spending more federal dollars to help in some way, that can make the inflation worse.
Look, this is a real struggle for Granite Staters, for Americans everywhere. Pretty much everywhere I go, people say it's groceries, it's rent, it's utilities, it's childcare, it's gasoline for the car, and it's healthcare, right? And there are certainly things we can do: increase the supply of housing, extend the tax credits for people buying their health insurance on the ACA. There are things we can do to bring down grocery prices, make the grocery business more competitive, less consolidated, but it starts with challenging this administration to stop doing some of the things, some of the choices it has made that have driven prices up. The president chose to impose tariffs. That has driven prices way up. And he chose to go to war, which has driven gas prices way up. Our recent data on the Joint Economic Committee says that the average New Hampshire family has spent $3,900 more for basic goods and services since President Trump became president.
And you've got to do a little verbal tussle with the Secretary of the Treasury over this, about whether or not he communicates this to the president. He said inflation is, quote, a short-term blip. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it obviously isn't. We saw inflation, you know, the difference between inflation before the war and inflation after. I think it was 2.4 before the war. It's 4.2 now. And we know that the gas prices and tariffs are major contributors to that inflation. And even if the Straits of Hormuz were to open again tomorrow, what we understand from people who study this is that the gas prices won't come back fast because a lot of the oil reserves around the globe have been depleted significantly. We don't have the inventory we need to stabilize those prices. So at the end of the day, what I was really interested in with Secretary Bessent, we have a president who says he loves inflation and he doesn't think about the financial situation of Americans. What everybody wants to be able to do is work hard, keep more money in their pocket, build a better future for their family. And you have a Secretary of the Treasury. So I said to him, this is what the president says: is anybody in his orbit giving him the real facts, letting him know what average Americans, Granite Staters, are experiencing. And what you heard back from Scott Bessent was a challenge to the reality that people are seeing every day in the grocery store, challenging me on the fact that food prices have increased and that inflation is a problem. And I think it's really important for people to realize not only does the president not understand or care what they're going through, the people around him who are charged with understanding the economy and its impact on real Americans have no interest in really confronting the president with the truth.
All right, much more we want to get to, Senator. Don't go anywhere. We're going to hit the break here. We'll be right back with more from Senator Hassan, including her role in trying to win back the first in the nation primary with the DNC. Stay with us.